The folded Thanksgiving invitation sat in the trash, unopened. Its corner dipped in cold tea, the ink smudged where the word family once was. My phone buzzed again. Please don't come to dinner. She's uncomfortable. No name, no warmth. Just that. I sat still, letting the silence hum in the room where his baby photos still hung. From the drawer, I pulled out an envelope, the one I'd kept sealed for years, addressed to a lawyer. I had a seat at Th. James still stopped by. He'd come over after school, laptop in hand, eager to teach me something new. We'd laugh often. Real laughter, the kind that rose from the chest and left a glow in its wake. One day, he showed me how to create an email list for my writing group. Another day, he helped me scan my mother's old recipe cards. I want to make a little book, I told him. Something I can leave behind. Not for anyone specific. Just so it doesn't get lost. He looked at me and said, I think it's already working. And maybe it was. I'd started to feel less like someone wrapping up a life, and more like someone building it again, piece by piece. The house looked different now. Not because I changed the furniture or painted the walls, but because I'd stopped decorating it for anyone else. I put out the good dishes when I felt like it. Lit candles in the middle of the day just because the scent made me feel calm. I played records again, old jazz, the kind Harold loved, the kind I used to turn off when company came because no one else liked it much. Now it played freely. I'd even set up a tiny table in the sunroom, a writing nook. Just a lamp, my journal, and a vase of daffodils. My own little corner. My own sacred space. My children still called, more often now. But I didn't let their urgency bend me. I answered when I wanted. I gave updates if I felt like it. And when they asked about the will or the land or the new arrangements, I simply said, it's already settled. Because it was. Not just on paper, but in my heart. There was no going back to the woman who waited by the window, who made excuses for absence, who believed love was earned by being useful. Now, I moved from a place of dignity. Not distance. Just truth. Sarah came by one weekend with her youngest in tow. A surprise visit. The little one ran into my arms like nothing had changed. And in that moment, I was reminded, not all love needs rebuilding. Some of it just needs to be held gently. She asked to paint with me. We sat at the dining table, the one I'd stopped using for large dinners, and spread out watercolor paper. She painted a sun. I painted a small, quiet house with light in the windows. Is that your house? She asked. Yes, I said. It is now. Sarah watched us from the kitchen. I saw something in her face, not regret exactly. More like understanding. A slow realization that I was no longer waiting for their version of love to return. Because I had found something fuller. Something chosen. Something mine. When they left, the little one turned and waved. I like your house, Grandma. And I whispered back, so do I. That night, I made a bowl of soup and curled into my chair. No television. Just the sound of wind outside and the creak of this old house settling in. I opened my journal. Wrote 5 words. I am not missing anymore. And meant every one. I often think about that plate. The one they left on the counter last Christmas. Cold, wrapped in plastic, a silent summary of everything they didn't say. It used to haunt me. But now, I see it differently. That plate marked the end of something I had been clinging to, the illusion that I needed to be needed in order to be worthy. It wasn't just a forgotten visit. It was a turning, a quiet moment that whispered, you don't have to wait anymore. And I didn't. I stood up from that silence, not to fight, but to begin again. Not loud, not bitter, just awake. I still love them. I probably always will. But love doesn't mean giving away every part of yourself until there's nothing left. Now my love has roots. Boundaries. A gate that only opens by choice. There is peace in that. There is power. I'm not the woman they used to know. The one who filled the gaps, softened every blow, made it all easier. I'm the woman who lit a candle in an empty room, poured a cup of tea, and said, this is enough. I am enough. So if you're sitting in a quiet house, wondering if anyone will knock, if anyone sees you, if your worth has faded like old wallpaper, hear me now. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not what they overlook. You are what endures. You are your own. And sometimes being left out is what finally lets you step in, fully, to your own life. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, remember, your worth doesn't depend on their understanding. Share your story in the comments. At table once, but I suppose comfort means erasing mothers now. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Comment below. The house has stayed the same since Harold passed, quiet, patient, and kind. The floral wallpaper, the ticking of the old wooden clock, the creak in the third step. It's all stayed exactly as he left it. The cushions on the floral sofa still sink more on the left where he used to sit. And the kitchen window, it still fogs up every morning while I boil water for my tea. I'm 76 now. A retired nurse. Widow of 22 years. I walk slower, breathe a little heavier, but I keep up with the world in my own way. My son Aaron used to say I had hands like angels, always in motion, always caring. I remember how he'd run to me after school, his tiny hands gripping drawings of superheroes with Mom written in bold, messy letters. Those days feel like another lifetime now. Our home was always the place for Thanksgiving. Every year, without fail, the whole family would gather here. I'd rise at dawn to start the turkey, wearing Harold's old apron, humming along to the same gospel cassette. Aaron loved the stuffing. I still remember the way he'd sneak bites before dinner and flash that guilty smile. After Harold passed, I kept the tradition alive. Even when the table grew quieter and the chairs sat more empty, I cooked for them and for the memories. But things began to change the year Aaron met Marla. She came from a polished kind of family, the kind that sent fancy invitations for backyard barbecues. She was polite, always smiling, but cold behind the eyes. From the beginning, she found me a little much. She said I talked too long, touched too often, held on too tightly. Aaron laughed it off at first. But slowly, his laughter quieted too. The first Thanksgiving after their wedding, they chose to spend it with Marla's family in Charleston. Just this once, Aaron had said, stroking my hand. We'll come next year. I smiled, of course. I always smiled. I set a smaller table that year. 3 plates, mine, the television, and the silence. Next year, they came, but late. The turkey was dry, the rolls cold. Marla brought her own cranberry sauce and took photos of everything, captioning them, trying Grandma's cooking. She never called me Mom. Not once. Over time, little things began to shift. Aaron stopped calling as often. When I'd ask questions, he'd say, I told Marla to fill you in. But Marla never did. Birthdays became texts. Visits became rare. They had a daughter, Ellie, 2 years ago. I wasn't there at the hospital. They said it was a lot to coordinate. Still, I knitted booties. I mailed gifts. I never missed a birthday. I kept the nursery room here just in case they ever visited. It still has the rocking chair Harold built, and a quilt I made when Aaron was born. Church friends noticed before I did. You don't see them much, one had said gently after service. You must miss them. I nodded and changed the subject. I started noticing patterns. I was no longer included in family group chats. I found out about milestones, a new job, Ellie's first steps, through Facebook posts, sometimes days later. Once, when I commented a heart, Marla deleted it. Still, I made excuses. They're busy, I'd say. Young families have so much on their plate. But it wasn't just busyness. It was something colder. Then came the invitations, or the lack of them. 2 years in a row, they celebrated Thanksgiving at Marla's parents' home. The third year, I asked if I should bring anything. The message I got back was short. This year it's just going to be immediate family. That stung. But I swallowed it. I baked a pie anyway and left it at their doorstep. No reply. Not even a thank you. And still, I hoped. That's the thing about mothers. We hold on, even when the rope burns. This year, I saw a post from Marla a week before Thanksgiving. A long table set for 12, captioned, "Can't wait to host again." My name wasn't mentioned. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe Aaron would remember the way I used to warm his hands after playing outside, or the way I sat by his bed through fevers and fears. But then came the message. Plain. Cold. Without punctuation. Please don't come to dinner. She's uncomfortable. Just like that. A lifetime undone in 10 words. I stared at the message until the phone dimmed itself. No, sorry, Mom. No, we love you. Just distance. Decided. Final. The invitation they'd mailed, the one from Marla's online card service, arrived the next day. But it didn't reach the kitchen table. I dropped it into the trash without opening it. It landed against the side of my teacup, half full and cold. That's where I found it again, while cleaning. Edges stained. Addressed to me, but never meant for me. And so, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the drawer by my bedside. Inside was an envelope. Yellowed, sealed, untouched. The name on the front still read, E. Kaplan, ESQ, Harold's old attorney. I pressed it against my chest. Not out of anger, but something deeper. Something like grief, and the slow, quiet birth of resolve. After that message, something in me grew still. Not quiet like peace, but quiet like the moments before a storm you never wanted. I didn't reply to him. What was there to say? My son had sent me away with 10 words. And yet, life went on in its odd, steady rhythm. The morning paper still came folded in half. The neighbor's dog barked at nothing. The soup in my pot still simmered, still bubbled. But inside me, something had changed. The humiliations had never been loud. That was the thing about Marla. She didn't raise her voice, but she knew how to shrink a person with a glance, with a pause, with a smile that held no warmth. Like the time I brought over a peach cobbler in July, wrapped in foil, still warm. She opened the door, took it, and said, "Oh, we're not doing sugar anymore." Then she set it on the bench by the front door and closed it behind her. I stood there a minute longer than I should have. Or when I tried to help Ellie with her shoes during a visit. Ellie was fussy, and I reached down to buckle them. Marla scooped her up so fast, saying, "She doesn't like to be touched by too many people." Too many people. That's what I'd become. Not grandma. Just another unnecessary presence. Aaron saw it. I know he did. He'd glance at me and then look away, like a boy caught doing something wrong. He never said anything. Just rubbed his neck and changed the subject. Once, at church, a neighbor asked me how Ellie liked the quilt I made. I smiled and said she hadn't received it yet. But I'd mailed it weeks ago. With a card handwritten. I never heard back. Never saw a photo. Not even a mention. Then came the silence. The long, empty weekends where I'd sit with my phone face up, waiting for a call that never came. Sometimes I'd reread our old texts. Aaron used to send me updates from work, photos of Ellie eating mashed peas, videos of her babbling. Now, all I saw were forwarded links and clipped responses. When I called, it would ring twice and go to voicemail. If I texted, I might get a thumbs up or a "we're busy right now." And still I clung to hope. I left voicemails. I wrote cards. I even baked cookies and left them in their mailbox. The tin was gone the next day, but no one said a word. One afternoon, I saw them at the grocery store. I was in the produce aisle, squeezing avocados. Aaron pushed the cart. Marla walked beside him, holding Ellie. I waved before I could stop myself. Aaron looked up, startled. He waved back, a weak little flick of his fingers. Marla nudged him and whispered something. Then they turned the cart and disappeared down another aisle. I stood there for a while. I didn't buy the avocados. Sometimes I'd hear about things secondhand. "Oh, I saw Aaron and Marla at the fall festival," someone would say. Ellie was dressed as a pumpkin. I'd nod and smile like I knew. But I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even known they were going. The last time I was in their home, I remember noticing the photos. Frames along the mantel, fresh and shiny. Marla's family at the beach. Ellie's first birthday. Their wedding in a golden frame. But none of me. Not even one. It was as if I had been gently, carefully erased. And what hurt most wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. The silence. The absence of my name in their joy. The way they celebrated without me, lived without me, built something new while quietly folding me out of the picture. I used to be the center of the table. Now, I wasn't even on the guest list. Still, I kept making excuses. Maybe Marla was just particular. Maybe Aaron was trying to keep peace. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe. But each maybe was another little betrayal. Another moment where love should have spoken up and didn't. And then that text. "Please don't come to dinner. She's uncomfortable." No shared decision. Just her discomfort and his agreement. That told me everything I needed to know. He chose her comfort over my presence. Not just once, but every time. And I allowed it. I allowed it because I loved him, because I didn't want to push. Because that's what mothers do. We stay small so our children can grow. But one day, you look around and realize you've made yourself so small. You've disappeared. So I stopped making excuses. I started seeing the pattern. The dinners missed. The stories untold. The spaces I was no longer invited to. The soft, silent pushing out. And I knew this wasn't about one dinner. This was a slow, careful removal. And I had let it happen, one polite smile at a time. I went home that night and stood by the window. The sky was dark, but the stars were loud. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel sad. I felt clear. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, the phone still in my lap, the message glowing up at me like a little wound that wouldn't close. "Please don't come to dinner. She's uncomfortable." I must have read it 20 times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because some part of me refused to. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. The pain didn't come like a storm. It came like fog. Slow. Creeping. Filling the room until I couldn't see myself anymore. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. The tall one Harold hung years ago when I turned 50, so I could see myself before church. I looked at my reflection, not searching for beauty, but for presence. Did I still exist? Did I still matter? What startled me most wasn't the lines or the sagging. It was the dullness in my eyes. Like something had gone missing in me. Not overnight, but over years. I had disappeared piece by piece, and no one noticed. Not even me. I thought of all the Thanksgivings I had cooked. The pies I'd baked from scratch even when my back ached. The turkeys Harold helped baste. The times Aaron would run through the house with whipped cream on his nose, yelling that he was Thanksgiving king. All those moments we'd shared, had they meant nothing? How did I become someone you hide? Someone you silence with a text? I sat down again, slower this time, and picked up the photograph from my nightstand. The one of Aaron at age 5, holding a sunflower bigger than his head. We'd planted that together. He used to call me his best girl. I remembered his little voice saying, "When I grow up, I'll take care of you, Mama." Promise. But promises grow old too, it seems. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time I felt wanted. Not tolerated. Not smiled at politely. But truly wanted. It had been years. Maybe before Marla. Maybe before the house stopped echoing with footsteps and became a museum of memory. The sharpest pain wasn't rejection. It was replacement. They had built a life, a table, a circle, a rhythm, and I had no seat in it. And suddenly, I knew something with a quiet, startling clarity. I was never going to be invited back in. This wasn't about misunderstanding or miscommunication. It wasn't a phase. They weren't just busy. This was a choice. And Aaron had made it. I think that's when my heart finally cracked. Not from the loss itself, but from the realization that I had been slowly grieving a living child. I stood up and walked to the dining room. The table was still set with the lace runner from last Thanksgiving, the one I'd ironed in case they came. I touched its edge and felt how thin it was, how fragile. Just like my hope had been. I looked at each chair. The one where Harold used to sit. The one Aaron always claimed. The smaller one I'd brought in for Ellie, even though she never came. I'd built this room around them. Around a family that no longer looked back. I walked to the cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, folded neatly, were all the cards and notes Aaron had ever made me. Mother's Day drawings. Birthday scribbles. Even the handmade ornament from 2nd grade. A popsicle stick star with glitter peeling off. I held it in my hand. It used to sparkle. And then, I felt something rise in me. Not anger. Not revenge. But truth. I had been mourning a place that no longer existed. A title, mother, grandmother, that no longer held the same meaning. I had spent years shrinking myself to make room for their comfort, thinking if I loved harder, softer, quieter, I could keep my place. But love isn't meant to be proven. It's meant to be shared. And I had loved enough. I had shown up time and again with food, with gifts, with prayers, with patience. And now, I was being asked to not show up at all. That was my breaking point. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a door. I simply stood up straighter. I walked back to my bedroom and pulled out the envelope, the one I hadn't touched since Harold's funeral. Inside were his documents, the deed to this house, the letter he'd written for later. I'd never opened that letter. I always told myself there would be a right time. I guess grief is funny like that. It makes you think there's always more time. But now I needed his voice. With hands that trembled only slightly, I opened the envelope. The paper was yellowed, his handwriting still steady and strong. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. If they ever make you feel small, remember this house is yours. You built it. You filled it with love. Don't ever forget that. H. That was it. But it was enough. He had seen me. Even in death, he had seen me. I folded the letter and placed it gently on my nightstand. Then I picked up the phone, not to call Aaron, not to plead, but to search. I typed in a name I hadn't thought about in years. Eli Kaplan, attorney at law. Because I had a seat at that table once. And I may not be welcome anymore. But I was not going to be erased. The morning after I read Harold's letter, I woke before the sun. The air was still, cool, and quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't press on your chest but opens it. I sat by the window with my tea, wrapped in the shawl my sister had knit me years ago, and watched the world wake without me. But this time, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt anchored. I made 2 calls that day. One to Eli Kaplan's office. The other to the hair salon down on Maple Avenue. The salon took me first. "It's been a while, Mrs. Holloway," the young stylist said gently. I nodded, let her wash and comb and trim the years off me just a little. She didn't ask many questions, just smiled at the end and said, "You look like yourself again." When I returned home, I opened the cabinet in the hallway and pulled out a stack of folders I hadn't touched in a decade. Property documents, Harold's pension statements, insurance papers. I laid them all out on the dining table, next to my tea. I went through each one slowly, underlining names, dates, account numbers. I didn't rush. This wasn't panic. It was purpose. The next morning, I took a cab to Eli's office. He was older than I remembered, rounder around the middle, glasses perched low on his nose. But when he saw me, he smiled in that same steady way. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, rising to shake my hand. "It's been a long time." I nodded. "It has. But I believe I need your help again." We sat for nearly 2 hours. I told him everything, not in a voice of pain, but of fact. I told him about the text, the silence, the way I had become a ghost in my own life. I showed him the deed to the house, still in my name. I showed him Harold's letter. I told him about the shared account Aaron helped set up years ago when I had that knee surgery. "Just in case," Aaron had said. Now I saw it for what it might become. Eli listened, took notes, asked gentle questions. Then he said, "You're not the first mother to walk through this door with a bruised heart. But you're one of the few who walked in with her spine straight." That line stayed with me. We drafted new documents that week. A living will, a healthcare directive, a full transfer of all accounts into my sole name. I removed Aaron as an authorized user, closed the shared account, secured everything. Quietly. I didn't tell them. Not yet. There was no need to. This wasn't for them. It was for me. Each paper I signed, each envelope I sealed, felt like a brick placed back into my foundation, steadying the parts of me that had long been weathered by silence and shrinking. One evening, I stood at the doorway of the guest room, the nursery I had once prepared for Ellie. The tiny socks still sat folded in a drawer. The mobile still hung from the ceiling. I picked up the soft pink blanket I had crocheted with aching hands 2 winters ago and folded it once more, this time for me. I placed it in a small cedar box and locked it away in the closet. Not because I was giving up, but because I was letting go. There's a difference, you know. Giving up feels like grief. Letting go feels like breath. I started making changes around the house. Subtle ones. I moved Harold's chair to the reading nook and filled the shelf with my old gardening books. I framed one of Ellie's photos, a baby picture from the one Christmas I was allowed to visit, but I placed it in the hallway, not the living room. A memory, not a shrine. In the kitchen, I cleared out the fancy china I had saved for family gatherings and donated most of it to the church pantry. I kept 2 place settings. Just enough for me, and a friend, if one ever stayed for tea. One morning, I even planted tulips along the walkway. Pink, Harold's favorite. The soil felt good in my hands, grounding. Like I was rooting something of myself back into the world. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. No calls. No messages. Not even to my sister, who always wanted the juicy details. This wasn't for show. This was reclamation. I started journaling again. Just small entries, little things I'd noticed, dreams I'd had, meals I'd cooked. One entry simply read, "I'm still here." And I was. I had spent so many years trying to stay lovable, stay needed, stay relevant, that I forgot what it felt like to simply be. And now I was becoming again. Quietly. Firmly. One morning a letter arrived. Not from Aaron, but from Marla. It wasn't cruel. Just curt. She said they were concerned about some of the changes I was making, that Aaron felt hurt I hadn't reached out after the misunderstanding. That they were still open to reconciliation if I could be respectful of boundaries. I placed the letter on the table. I didn't tear it. I didn't cry. I simply sat with it. It was the first time they'd used the word boundaries. And perhaps, in some strange way, we finally agreed on something. Because I was building some of my own, too. The thing about reclaiming your voice, even when it's quiet, is that once you begin, it echoes. Not loudly, but deeply. It fills the hollow spaces. The Monday after Marla's letter arrived, I made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs, toast, half a grapefruit. I set the table with a cloth napkin, like Harold used to. Not because anyone was watching, but because I was. And I mattered. After breakfast, I pulled out my journal and turned to a fresh page. I wrote, Day 1 of my own piece. Then I underlined it twice. The rest of that week, I took steps. Not giant, angry ones. Just small, steady ones. I began by reviewing all the paperwork Eli had helped organize. My assets, my health directives, my will. I rewrote it all. I removed Aaron as executor. Not out of spite, but because trust must be active, not assumed. Instead, I named a friend from church, Ruth. She's kind, steady, and sharp as a tack, even at 81. We've shared pews and potlucks for nearly a decade. She was surprised when I asked her, but I told her the truth. I just need someone who sees me. And she did. She always had. Next, I met with my banker, a young woman named Candace who treated me like I was still a person with agency, not just a lady with fading checks. I explained I wanted every account in my name only. No joint access. No silent hands in the background. We combed through every detail, and I signed where I needed to. As I left, Candace patted my hand gently. You're doing something really strong, she said. I smiled. I'm doing something overdue. That same afternoon, I went through the safe Harold had bolted into the floorboards of the guest room closet. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years. The insurance paperwork, our marriage certificate, even the tiny golden cross he gave me on our 30th anniversary. I slipped that around my neck. It didn't shine like it used to. But I didn't need shine. I needed memory. And memory I had in abundance. The more I organized, the more I realized how much of myself I had given away in small, invisible pieces. Not just to Aaron and Marla, but to time. To worry. To the idea that if I stayed quiet long enough, I'd be allowed to remain. But I wasn't going to beg for space anymore. I began setting small goals. Go for a walk 3 times a week. Call one old friend. Make one thing just for myself. I started with soup. A big pot of lentil and barley, the kind I used to make when Aaron was little and money was tight. This time, I made it for no one but me. I froze half and labeled it for a strong day. Then, on a Thursday morning, I received a phone call. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Mrs. Holloway? This is Joan from Maple County Records. We received a call inquiring about the title status on your property. The inquiry was made by someone not listed on your deed. I thought you should know. I thanked her, heart steady. I didn't need to guess who called. That evening, I pulled out the folder where I had kept a copy of the deed, stamped clearly with my name and the date Harold transferred full ownership to me. Marla and Aaron had tried before. Quietly. Legally. And now, it seemed, they were testing the waters again. But this time, I wasn't unprepared. I wasn't shaking. I was ready. I called Eli. He answered on the second ring. I told him about the call, and he let out a long sigh. They might be trying to gauge what access they still have, he said. But don't worry. Everything's locked. You've done your part. And I had. That was the difference now. Before, I would have cried, wondered what I'd done wrong. Asked myself if maybe I'd misread everything. But now I saw it clearly. It wasn't me. It was their choices. Their priorities. Their inability to hold space for a woman who no longer played small. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to stand. That weekend, Ruth came by for tea. She brought a lemon loaf and stories about her grandkids. I laughed more than I had in weeks. As we sat under the maple tree in the backyard, the one Harold planted the year Aaron was born, she looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." I nodded. I'm not waiting at the window anymore. Later that evening, I lit a candle in the kitchen. Not for anyone, just for warmth. I sat at the table, hands folded, and whispered, "Thank you, Harold, for building this place with me, for leaving me something worth standing in." And I meant it, because this house wasn't just brick and mortar. It was a memory, a witness, a quiet testament to the life I had built, and the life I was quietly reclaiming. The mind is a curious thing. It protects you from certain memories until you're strong enough to hold them. That night, after Ruth left and the house had gone quiet again, I found myself sitting on the floor beside the cedar chest in my bedroom, the one I hadn't opened in years. I lit a small lamp, letting its golden glow spill across the wooden panels. Then I opened the lid. Inside were layers of folded linens, Harold's old war medals, a pressed bouquet from our wedding, and at the very bottom, a small velvet box. I hadn't touched it in decades. I opened it slowly. Inside was a tiny brooch, silver, shaped like a bird mid-flight. It had belonged to my mother. And just like that, the memories poured in. Not gentle, not slow, but all at once, like the room had turned into a river. I was 14 again, standing in the cold hallway of the St. Mary's nursing facility. My hands were trembling, clutching the paper bag of lotion and peppermint candies she liked. My aunt had dropped me off, saying she'd be back in an hour. But I knew she wouldn't. She never stayed long. Mama sat in her chair by the window, eyes blank, mouth slack. She had stopped speaking months earlier. Stroke, they said. No hope for recovery, they whispered, like I wasn't old enough to understand. But I understood abandonment. They said it was better for her to be in a place with professional care. But it wasn't care that broke her. It was the silence, the being forgotten. One visit a week. No one holding her hand long enough. No one saying her name like it still mattered. I remembered standing at the window beside her, pressing my cheek to hers and whispering, "I'll never let this happen to you, and I'll never let this happen to me." She didn't respond, but I think she felt it. It was the first time I tasted the quiet bitterness of being erased, not by strangers but by family. I remember asking my father why she couldn't come home. He looked through me, muttered something about resources, and left the room. We visited less and less. By the end, it was only me. I remember the last visit clearly. It was snowing. I brought her the brooch. She didn't open her eyes, but I pinned it on her gown anyway, near her heart. She died the next day. They found the brooch still in place, untouched. I wasn't even told until the funeral had already been planned. I wasn't asked to speak. I just sat in the second row, listening to strangers talk about a woman I loved, in words that felt too clean, too empty. That brooch. I had tucked it away, not because I wanted to forget, but because the pain had been too sharp to carry around. Until now. Now, I understood it differently. Mama had been a woman of soft hands and strong silences. She never raised her voice, but she had a way of making you feel safe just by sitting beside you. When my father left, it was Mama who held the family together, not with money, but with memory, with warmth, with presence. And still, in the end, she was pushed aside. Forgotten. Because she didn't make noise. Because quiet women are easy to ignore until they are gone. As I held the brooch in my hand now, decades later, I realized something. I had lived my whole life trying not to end up like her. And yet, here I was, watching my son slowly turn away from me. Repeating a cycle I had sworn to break. But the difference was, I had the choice to stop it. Mama didn't have options. She didn't have power or preparation. She lived in a time when women like her just disappeared into white sheets and quiet rooms. But I had papers. I had a lawyer. I had my name on a deed. And most importantly, I had my voice, no longer soft from fear, but soft from choice. I closed the box gently and set it on my nightstand. Then I reached into the chest again and pulled out an old photograph, one I hadn't looked at in years. It was Mama in her garden, holding a trowel, her face turned toward the sun. She looked proud, grounded, free. That night, I placed the photo beside Harold's letter. 2 anchors, one from where I came and one from the life I built. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking. Because even though that old wound still ached, I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I was facing it, holding it, learning from it. My past had taught me what forgetting looks like. Now my present was teaching me how to remember, with power, with grace, with open eyes. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that doesn't warn you. The sun was out, the robins were busy in the hedges, and I was humming while folding towels. Nothing in the air felt heavy. Nothing said, "Your heart's about to break again." I had just sat down with a cup of tea when the mail arrived, a small stack, nothing unusual. Grocery ads, a church bulletin, and one large envelope with my name printed neatly across the front. No return address. I opened it slowly, thinking perhaps it was something from Social Security or Medicare. But what I pulled out wasn't from the government. It was a copy of a form, pages of legal paperwork. Printed in ink I recognized all too well. Sharp, precise, like Marla's handwriting had bled into the page. A power of attorney form. Filed. Signed. But not by me. My eyes traced the names. There it was under appointed agent, Marla Holloway. And under principal, Evelyn Holloway, my name, printed there like it belonged to someone else. I sat back. My hands went still. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing. They had submitted a power of attorney. Not one I had signed. Not one I had read. But there it was, in official ink, declaring that Marla had the right to make decisions on my behalf. Medical. Financial. Legal. Everything. My breath slowed. The walls of the living room, usually soft with warm memories, now felt like strangers. I turned the pages, one by one, hoping for a clue that it was some mistake. A draft. A mix-up. But each signature matched, each date aligned. Only, the signature beside my name wasn't mine. It was a forgery. I stared at it, my own name written in a hand that wasn't mine, claiming consent I never gave. And suddenly everything clicked. The cold invitations. The missing phone calls. The attempts to gain access to my property records. The sudden concerns Marla expressed in her letter. This wasn't just about comfort or space. This was a slow, strategic erasure. They weren't just pushing me out emotionally. They were preparing to remove me legally. I stood up. My legs felt strange, like the floor had shifted. I held the form in my hands and looked out the window, the same one where I used to watch Aaron play catch with Harold in the yard. How did we get here? I remembered the day Aaron helped me set up online banking after my knee surgery. Just in case, he'd said, smiling. So I can help you if anything ever happens. I had trusted him. He was my son, my only child. I had no reason to believe he would let someone else draw a line through my independence. And yet here we were. I called Eli. My voice didn't shake. When I told him what I received, he was quiet at first. Then he said, "Bring it in. We'll handle it." I hung up, placed the documents in a folder, and sat back down. The tea had gone cold. But I didn't. What hurt most wasn't the forged paper. It wasn't even the fact that Marla had done it. It was that Aaron had let her. Maybe he hadn't signed it himself. Maybe his hands weren't the ones that wrote my name in false ink. But silence is a kind of signature, too. He knew. He had to. And if he didn't, then he had chosen not to know. I thought of all the nights I had stayed up with him through fevers. The time he fell from his bike and I carried him, all 70 pounds of him, back home in the rain. The times I said no to new shoes for myself so he could have cleats, band trips, books. All the times I gave, and now this. A forged document claiming my voice. A signature that wasn't mine, signed by a family that no longer saw me as a person, but as a burden to be managed. I didn't cry. I had no tears left for them. Instead, I pulled out Harold's letter again. Read his words, slow and soft. Don't let them fold you away. No, I wouldn't. That evening, Eli confirmed it all. The document had been filed improperly. No notary, no witnesses, and clear signs of signature mismatch. It wouldn't hold. But the intent was unmistakable. They were preparing for more, he said. If you hadn't caught this, they might have used it to access your accounts. Or even make medical decisions on your behalf. The thought chilled me. To have your voice stolen before you've gone silent. To have your presence removed while your body still stands. I thanked him. We drafted a letter, clear, firm, legal. A declaration of identity, intent, and full revocation of any outside claims. He would send it the next morning. As I walked home, the evening light stretched across the sidewalk like a promise. I breathed it in long and deep. I had reached the bottom of the well. The quietest, darkest part of betrayal. But I had also found something deeper than pain. Certainty. I would not be erased. Not by a signature. Not by a silence. Not by anyone. After the letter was mailed, I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't check the mailbox for a return envelope or keep my phone beside me at night, hoping for an apology or explanation. That part of me, the one that held her breath each time the phone lit up, was gently laid to rest. What replaced it was something quieter and far more steady. Resolve. There was no dramatic announcement, no scene. Just a woman, a mother, who chose, finally, to stop proving her worth to those who had already looked away. The shift began at home. I started removing things not out of anger, but out of clarity. I went through my drawers, my closets, my shelves. I packed away the tiny shoes I had bought for Ellie, still tucked in their tissue paper. The storybooks I once imagined reading to her, Goodnight Moon, Harold and the Purple Crayon, were donated to the library. I removed the World's Best Grandma mug from the kitchen and replaced it with a simple blue one I liked better. No title. No reminder. It wasn't grief. It was release. I didn't need symbols to remind me of a role I had poured myself into, only to be left empty. What I needed were things that reflected who I was now, not who I used to be in someone else's eyes. In the hallway, there was a gallery wall of family pictures. I didn't take them down, but I did rearrange them. I put the oldest ones in front, my wedding photo with Harold, a candid shot of me in nursing school, one of us laughing under the Christmas tree the year we got the old station wagon. I gave those memories their rightful place again. At church, when asked how Aaron and the baby were, I simply smiled and said, "We're walking different roads right now." No bitterness. Just truth. People nodded as if they understood. Maybe they did. I spent more time with Ruth and her circle. Women who wore brooches like armor and passed around lemon cake like communion. They didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. They talked about birds and recipes and books. One even loaned me a novel she said had changed her life. I read it in 2 nights. I began saying no to things that drained me, and yes to things that didn't ask me to shrink. I joined a weekly craft group at the community center. Nothing fancy, just a gathering of quiet hands and slow conversation. I started working on a quilt. Not for anyone else. Just for me. A patch for every season of my life. One square held blue flowers for the years Aaron was little, bright and open. Another had autumn leaves for the years of loss. Another, a plain beige one for now, simple, honest, unfinished. It felt good to stitch my life into something that couldn't be erased. I also changed my routines. I stopped waiting by the phone on holidays. I cooked smaller portions. I no longer baked extra, just in case someone dropped by. I lit candles at dinner, even if it was just soup and toast. I used the nice plates. I played music during breakfast. One morning, I stood in the center of the living room and whispered aloud, "This is still my life." And it was. I no longer felt the urge to explain my choices. I didn't call Aaron. I didn't respond to Marla's last email asking why I had involved legal channels over something that could have been discussed. Because there was nothing left to discuss. Silence was not an absence anymore. It was a boundary. I didn't need to scream to reclaim space. I simply stopped offering it where it wasn't respected. What surprised me most was how light I began to feel. Not joyful, that's not quite the word. But unburdened. Some days were still heavy, of course. There were mornings when I'd catch myself looking toward the road, wondering if a little car seat might appear in the back window, if a small hand might wave. But I no longer built my days around what if. Instead, I built them around what is. On Sunday afternoons, I sat on the porch with a book. On Wednesday mornings, I watered the tulips. I wrote letters to old friends and received some back. One, from a nurse I'd trained with in '72, wrote, "I still remember how you stood up for the girl they wanted to fail. You always had a backbone, Evelyn." I smiled reading that. Maybe I had just forgotten it for a while. One afternoon, as I sorted through old sewing patterns, I found a scrap of paper tucked inside one of Harold's envelopes. It was a grocery list, chicken broth, mint tea, thread, and at the very bottom, in his handwriting, "Make Evie smile." I sat there holding it, letting the warmth of his small gesture fill the quiet. And I said aloud, "I'm getting there, Harold." Because I was. The shift wasn't loud. It didn't come with confrontation or fury. It came with folded laundry, with tulips blooming, with tea sipped from a plain blue mug. It came with a woman choosing, gently, firmly, to stop begging to be seen, and instead to see herself. Sometimes strength doesn't come from thunder or fire. Sometimes it comes from a chair pulled close and a voice that simply says, "I believe you." That's what happened one quiet Thursday afternoon when Ruth knocked gently on my door, holding a folder and a tin of almond cookies. "I didn't want to intrude," she said, "but I was reading something the other day and thought of you." I let her in, grateful for her presence, steady as ever. We sat by the kitchen window where the sun spilled in warm and wide, the kind of light that made even silence feel friendly. She placed the folder on the table, sliding it gently toward me. "It's a contact I've had since George passed," she said. "She's a financial advisor. But more than that, she helps women, especially older ones, find their footing after big shifts." I smiled. "Is it that obvious I've had a shift?" She reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's obvious you've remembered who you are." I took the folder, unsure if I'd use it, not out of fear, but out of wondering whether I needed more outside help. I had already taken legal steps. My accounts were secure. My home protected. But something about Ruth's gesture, her quiet nudge, stayed with me. That night, I sat by my bedside lamp and flipped through the materials. Inside were pamphlets, articles, notes in Ruth's careful handwriting. One line caught my eye, underlined twice. "Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to bow." I stared at those words a long time, because that was what I had been learning, slowly, stitch by stitch, breath by breath. And something in me stirred, not a rebellion, not defiance, but an awakening. a rising of a voice I had almost forgotten I possessed. The next morning, I called the advisor. Her name was Celia, and her voice was clear, kind, and strong. We met the following week in her modest office above the pharmacy on Pine Street. She wore simple pearl earrings and had a laugh that filled the room without drowning it. I told her my story. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush, just listened, nodding slowly. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "You've already done the hardest part. You stopped asking to be invited." I hadn't thought of it like that, but it was true. We spent the afternoon reviewing everything. She helped me create a legacy plan, not just a will, but a roadmap of where my heart and memory would go when I no longer walked this earth. I told her about Ellie, and even though I'd removed Erin from my legal documents, I still wanted Ellie to know, one day, that I had loved her deeply. We wrote a letter together, one to be sealed and opened only when Ellie turned 18. A simple, soft letter. No bitterness. Just stories. Stories of the holidays I had dreamed of sharing. Of the quilt I'd begun stitching, with a square just for her, a tiny yellow patch with little bluebirds sewn into the corners. I left the letter with Celia for safekeeping. She promised to store it with the other documents and see that it reached Ellie, no matter what. That decision, that quiet reaching forward, gave me peace. It didn't fix everything. It didn't rebuild bridges that had already crumbled. But it gave shape to the love I still carried, even if it had nowhere else to go right now. Later that evening, I returned home, poured myself a glass of cold water, and stood at the back door watching the garden. The tulips were taller now. Some had opened fully, bright, brave, wide. Others were still curled inward, waiting. Each was on its own time. So was I. I picked up my journal and began writing. Not an entry this time, but a list. Not of tasks or groceries, but of truths. I am not broken. I am not forgotten. I am not waiting anymore. I am a whole person still growing. I deserve peace, even in quiet. I underline the last one. The next morning, I returned to the cedar chest, opened the velvet box, and pinned Mama's brooch to my sweater. Not hidden, not tucked away. That little silver bird, forever mid-flight, resting near my heart. I wore it to church that Sunday. Ruth noticed first. "It suits you," she said. "It's hers," I replied. But I think she would have wanted me to wear it now. And I think she would have. Because this wasn't about reclaiming something lost. It was about honoring something that had always been there, beneath the years, beneath the silence, beneath the pain. Myself. And in that soft return to self, I found strength, not in loudness or confrontation, but in the quiet certainty that I no longer needed permission to belong in my own life. Have you ever found strength in moments of silence? Let me know. The first sign of the ripple came in an envelope with Erin's handwriting. It arrived on a Tuesday, again, with the sun shining like it didn't know how much can shift beneath its warmth. I turned the envelope over in my hands. No return address, just his neat, cautious script. For a moment, I didn't want to open it. Part of me feared it would be another wound. But I had come too far to fear paper and ink. Inside was a single page. "Mom," it began. No dear. No warmth. Just Mom. "I'm writing because we were notified by an attorney that changes have been made regarding the house and your accounts. I didn't know you had taken these steps. I wish you'd spoken to me first." There it was. The first crack in his certainty. He went on about how he felt hurt and excluded. How Marla was only trying to help, and how I had misunderstood their intentions. He closed with a line I read 3 times. This wasn't how family should work. I folded the letter gently and placed it on the kitchen table. Then I whispered aloud, "No, it isn't." But not for the reasons he thought. That week there were more ripples. I received a call from the bank confirming that Erin had attempted to log into one of the old shared accounts, the one I had already closed. "His access has been removed," the woman said. "Just calling to verify." I thanked her, heart steady. Another day, Ruth mentioned that Marla had asked one of her church friends if Evelyn was doing okay, and whether I'd been confused lately. The suggestion was wrapped in concern, but the intention was clear. They were trying to soften their image, to explain the forgery, the silence, the removal. But the truth had already taken root, and it didn't need defending. Still, I watched carefully, not to protect myself, but to understand. Because when people begin to lose control over the version of you they created, they flail. They revise. They try to narrate your strength as instability. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply lived. One evening, I walked past the front window and saw Erin's car slow down. It didn't stop. He didn't get out. But I saw him look, really look, at the porch, the flowers, the warm light glowing from the front room. It was the first time in years he had passed by. The next day, he called. I let it ring. I let the voicemail collect his voice. Mom, I'd like to talk. I think things got out of hand. Maybe we could meet. I listened to it once, then deleted it. Because what he wanted wasn't truth. It was comfort. He wanted me to soften, to make it easier to forget what had been done. But some things shouldn't be softened. Some things need to stand. It wasn't punishment. It was protection. For me, for the self I had stitched back together, piece by piece. Marla sent an email the following week. Longer. Wordier. Full of soft language. Miscommunication. Feelings were misunderstood. A lot going on at the time. She ended with, "We'd love for you to join us this Thanksgiving, if you're open to it. Let's not let this divide us." It was not an apology. It was a request for silence. But I had already decided. My silence would not serve as their comfort anymore. I replied with one sentence. "Thank you for the invitation, but I've already made plans." And I had. That same day, Ruth and the ladies from church had invited me to their Thanksgiving luncheon. A simple potluck in the fellowship hall. Nothing fancy. Just warm food, warm hands, and women who remembered each other's names. I planned to bring butternut squash soup, Harold's favorite. I would wear my best cardigan and Mama's brooch. I would sit in a circle where no one asked me to shrink, and no one erased my chair. Aaron didn't reply to my message. Neither did Marla. But I imagined them reading it, sitting in the silence I once held. Now theirs to carry. Because actions echo. And just as mine had quietly stitched dignity back into my days, theirs now echoed with absence, with a mother no longer waiting at the window. There were no tantrums. No drama. Just distance. The kind that comes not from hate, but from choice. From a refusal to be pulled back into smallness. And so the consequences unfolded. Not in courtrooms or shouted arguments, but in quiet, undeniable truth. That I had taken my name back. That I had taken my seat back, not at their table, but at my own. And though it was smaller, and though fewer people gathered around it, it was mine. And that made all the difference. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving when Aaron knocked on my door. I heard the sound from the living room. 3 soft raps, no doorbell. I didn't move right away. I simply sat still, breathing in the lavender from my tea, the soft rustle of wind pressing against the windows. I let him knock again. When I finally opened the door, there he stood, my son. The same boy who once held my hand crossing the street, now a man standing awkwardly on my front porch, unsure of where he belonged. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Not as invitation, but as acknowledgement. He walked in slowly, his eyes tracing the house like it was the first time, or maybe, like it had become unfamiliar. The furniture was rearranged. The photos were different. The air still. He sat at the edge of the couch, shoulders hunched, hands clasped between his knees. I remained standing, arms folded gently across my chest. He began. "I wanted to talk." I nodded once. "Then talk." He looked down at his shoes. "I know things have been tense," he said. "I know you're upset. I just think, maybe everything got twisted. We never meant to hurt you. Marla was worried. About your memory. Your health. She thought." I raised my hand, softly but firmly. "No." He looked up. "You don't get to rewrite what happened, Aaron," I said, my voice even. "You filed false documents. You signed my name. You discussed selling my home. You pushed me out of family decisions. You removed me from hospital records. You silenced me." He opened his mouth, but I continued. "And when I asked nothing of you but honesty, you gave me a text." The room went quiet. Even the walls seemed to listen. "I didn't want your money. I didn't want control. I only wanted what every mother hopes for, a place at the table she built." He swallowed hard. I thought we were doing what was best." "No," I said. "You did what was easiest." That landed like a stone. He looked away. "I missed you," he whispered. "Ellie misses you." I nodded. "She might. But she doesn't know me. That was your choice." He flinched, just slightly. "I came today," he said, "because I wanted to invite you. Tomorrow. To dinner. Just you. No drama. Just family." I looked at him a long moment. The boy I had rocked through fevers. The man who had quietly placed me outside his life. He wasn't cruel. But he had been careless. And sometimes that's worse. Because carelessness wears a smile. I walked to the corner of the room and picked up a small folder. Inside was the legal letter Eli had sent, the one asserting my rights. I handed it to him. He didn't take it right away. "This is who I am now," I said. "A woman who protects herself. A woman who no longer waits by windows or reads into empty gestures. A woman who doesn't need permission to exist." He took the folder. "I'm not angry, Aaron. I'm clear." He looked at me then, really looked. And I think in that moment, he saw not just his mother, but a woman he had never truly known. One who stood quietly, not in weakness, but in peace. "You're not coming?" he asked. "No," I said. "I have plans. Good ones." He nodded slowly. There was no argument. No scene. Just a man sitting on a couch that no longer felt like his. He stood, smoothing his jacket. "Okay," he said. "I guess that's it." I nodded. He reached for the door, then paused. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am." "I hope so," I said gently. "For your own sake." He left without another word. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I walked back to the kitchen and stirred the soup. The pot steamed, the herbs bloomed. The radio played an old Billie Holiday tune. And I moved through my home with a grace I hadn't felt in years. Because the final confrontation didn't come with yelling. It came with boundaries. With truth. With choosing not to return to the place of hurt just because someone set a chair there again. He came to offer me a seat. But I had already built my own table. And it was enough. Thanksgiving morning arrived gently. No rush, no voices calling from upstairs, no clatter of too many feet on old wood floors. Just the soft hum of my kettle, the rustle of leaves skimming across the porch, and the sound of my own breath, steady and sure. I pulled the casserole from the oven, wrapped it in the checkered towel Harold always said made things taste better, and slipped on my coat. Mama's brooch rested at my collar, her silver bird catching bits of morning light. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky pale and kind. The streets were quiet, most homes tucked behind curtains of food and family and the thrum of busy love. Mine was quieter, but not empty. I arrived at the church hall just before noon. The scent of roasted vegetables and apple spice met me at the door, warm and generous. Ruth waved from across the room, her arms out wide, her eyes bright with welcome. "You made it," she said, pulling me into a hug. "Of course," I replied, smiling. The room was simple. Folding chairs, paper turkeys taped to the windows, soft hymns playing from a dusty speaker. But the feeling was sacred. Tables covered in mismatched cloths, dishes passed with laughter and care, stories told with no need for approval. I sat at a table with 4 other women, each of us different in age, color, story. But all of us familiar. We shared recipes and memories. We filled each other's glasses. One woman told a story about her husband burning the turkey every year. Another talked about a son who moved to Oregon and forgot her birthday 3 years in a row. We all nodded. We all understood. When my turn came, I simply said, "This year, I stopped waiting." The room went still for just a moment, the way it does when truth enters quietly. Ruth reached for my hand. "Good," she said. "Good for you." We ate. We laughed. We passed cranberry sauce in styrofoam cups and made room on paper plates for second helpings. Someone brought a pie with too much cinnamon. I had 2 slices. After lunch, I stood by the window, watching the trees bend in the breeze. No one asked me about Aaron. No one tiptoed around the word family. Because here, I was whole without explanation. Later, at home, I lit a candle and sat in my favorite chair, the one with Harold's indents still faintly in the cushion. I looked around at the photos, the books, the quilt in progress draped across the armrest. And I felt not joy, not celebration. I felt peace. True peace. The kind that comes when you stop asking to be loved in ways that hurt. The kind that grows in silence, in dignity, in the firm, soft yes you give yourself when others offer only maybe. That night, I pulled out Ellie's letter, the one Celia helped me write, and added one final line at the bottom. "If you ever feel unseen, know this. Your grandmother was here. She stood tall. And you can too." I sealed it again and placed it gently in the drawer. Then, just before bed, I stepped outside one last time. The sky was velvet dark. Stars like pins holding up the fabric of night. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you." To Harold. To Mama. To the women who stood before me. To the version of me I thought I'd lost, but who had been waiting, patient and whole, just beneath the ache. And I smiled, because I had found her again. There's a quiet kind of strength that comes in the winter of one's life. Not the strength to lift, but the strength to let go. Let go of who you thought you had to be to stay loved. Let go of waiting beside windows that never open. Let go of tables where your presence is tolerated, not cherished. In the end, I didn't reclaim my place in someone else's home. I reclaimed my place in my own. I still get mail addressed to Grandma Evelyn. I still see photos online of Ellie in dresses I never picked, at parties I was never invited to. And sometimes, yes, it still stings, not like a wound, but like an old bruise deep in the memory. But I no longer reach for what will not hold me. Now I reach for what's real. The warmth of a teacup between my palms. The creak of a porch step beneath a friend's laughter. The hush of the house as the day folds into night. Not empty, just still. I have learned that dignity doesn't demand anything. It simply stands. And I stand now, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with the calm strength of a woman who knows who she is, even if the world forgets. If you've listened this far, thank you. And if you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, I want you to know something very simple. Your worth does not depend on their understanding. Your love does not expire because they stopped receiving it. And your story, every quiet, tender inch of it matters. It matters because you matter. Even if no one says it, even if no one sees it, say it to yourself. I am still here. Because you are. And so am I. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, remember, your worth doesn't depend on their understanding. Share your story in the comments.